In this recording, I will talk about types of evidence. To start my presentation, I want to present to you a scenario. Whenever there is a car accident and the police comes onto the scene, the police wants to know what happened, and the police will typically do an investigation. This investigation, what the police concludes is typically it's pretty important. First, because they need to issue a citation if necessary. And then for insurance purposes, the police needs to kind of figure out who was at fault. And so when you look at this, the police has to look at all the possible evidence that is presented so they can make a conclusion. And so when you look in this scenario, typically they would like to see if there are witnesses who saw what happened. The police would also interview the drivers themselves and see their perspective of what they thought happened. And then if there were any possible videos that were taken or some kind of technology that has some kind of video surveillance, that they can use that to help also determine what really happened. And so as a police officer trying to figure out who was at fault and looking at all the different possible evidence, the police has to determine who is most reliable and trusted when it comes to the information that was given, especially if the evidence contradicts each other. So when the police looks at evidence, they have to decide which evidence is the most reliable and trusted so they can come up with a conclusion. So when we talk about types of evidence in reading, what does this look like? Many times when authors make an argument or they write an argument that they are making, in order to be convincing, they sometimes must use evidence to support their stance, position, or argument. Now, as critical thinkers, when we read these arguments, it's important that we know how to evaluate the evidence the author uses. So when we evaluate evidence, we must look at the following. We must look at what type of evidence the author uses, and can the evidence be trusted, and is the evidence reliable? Now, one of the things I want you to keep in mind throughout the presentation is that not all evidence are created equally. So some evidence are strong while other evidence are weak. So there are 6 types of evidence we will be looking at: casual observations, empirical research, anecdotes, visual items, statistics, and quotations. I will define each type of evidence. I will also give examples for each type of evidence. And then I have some questions and things that I want you to consider and think about when you see authors use these evidence to help you determine if the evidence is reliable or not. The first type of evidence is called casual observation. And casual observation is basically when the author presents an argument based on only his or her personal experiences. For example, you shouldn't go to eat at Molly's Pizza because when I went, the customer service was terrible. Now, some things for you to consider when someone tries to make an argument, and in this case, the argument is you shouldn't go to Molly's Pizza, and the evidence that this person uses to support why you should not go eat at Molly's Pizza is because the customer service was terrible. So one thing to consider is the author's opinions or conclusion might be influenced by his or her preferences. Okay, what is terrible customer service? I mean, maybe they didn't refill the glass one time, and this person may have felt like, oh, because of that one incident, it was terrible, okay? Or maybe their preferences, they have different expectations. And so it's based on the author's the author's opinion or conclusion, that it's just based on his or her preference. A question to ask yourself, okay, is what do we know about this author? Is this someone with credibility who might agree or disagree with this author? Would a lot of people agree if Molly's Pizza had terrible customer service? Or would a lot of people find that this place had really good customer service? Get on Yelp and find out, okay? And so there are some issues when an author uses casual observation to support his or her position. Another type of evidence is empirical research. And empirical research is basically a formal academic research carried out by the author, which involves experimentation or observation. Usually, empirical research follows the scientific method. Here's an example. Bennett, CO, Dees, Kim, and Bochenko found that the program TRIO, Student Support Services, help increase student retention and graduation rates. Now, these people that I mentioned are researchers, and they did a research on TRIO Student Support Services, and they found that when this program is implemented at a college, that student retention and graduation rates increase based on their research. So this conclusion here is based on a research that was done by researchers, okay? Now, here's another example. The research also found that when residential living communities were implemented, marginalized groups and faculty involvement thrived. So once again, this conclusion was found based on a research that was done. Some things to ask yourself and to consider when an author uses empirical research to support their argument is to ask yourself, how was this research carried out? When was the research conducted? Is it still relevant today? And who carried out this research? You will notice that an empirical research has similar characteristics of an academic article. So when we talk about academic article, and I ask you, how do you know this is an academic article? If you see research is being used, that is a huge clue to tell you that it is an academic article, okay? The third type of research is, a type of evidence is anecdotes or anecdotal notes, okay? And an anecdote is typically a short story or stories about individual peoples, and they are not based on scientific research. Now, the difference between anecdotes and casual observation. A casual observation is a personal experience. Anecdotes could be stories about other people, okay? And so in this example here, anecdotes are typically found in magazines. And an article that was in a magazine called An Open Letter to the Families of My Coronavirus ICU Patients is an open letter from an ICU nurse in the magazine called Good Housekeeping. Now, though it is her own experience, okay, but she's also telling the stories of her patients. And so in this case here, this is not scientific, okay, and it is not based on research. And so this is simply just anecdotes, someone's perspective of what they see or they see of a story that they are telling. So some questions to ask yourself and things to consider when an author uses anecdotes to support his or her argument is, to what extent are the anecdotes in the text representative of a larger group? Hey, do all nurses feel the same way that she does? Okay. Can examples of these people be generalized into a larger group? And are they extreme cases chosen to specifically support a dubious claim? Okay, and so these are some things that you have to think about when authors use anecdotes to support the argument. The fourth type of evidence that authors use are visual items, and these are usually like photographs, illustrations, pie charts, and so on. And so in this example here, I am using a diagram of the coronavirus death per day, and the blue curve is what would happen if the stay-at-home order would have had an estimated, if there was a stay-at-home order, without a stay-at-home order, the blue curve shows us how many people would have died. And then the red curve shows us how many people would have died if we put in a stay-at-home order. So in this case here, the author is using this diagram to support maybe his or her position on why stay-at-home orders are important. And so sometimes authors use visual items to support their argument. Photographs, why are they used? Photographs help make a story more compelling. A report with charts and graphs will be more effective. Diagrams make it easier to understand. So what are some things you need to consider? What purpose does the visual support serve, and how representational are the visual items? Is this just a particular group? Is this for everyone? Now you'll notice that this is for specifically the state of Illinois, okay? And so would this be relevant to another state, okay? And so these are some things you need to think about when you analyze visual items and when authors use visual items to support their argument. Another type of evidence is statistics. Statistics are basically numbers, and these could come from reliable sources or they can come from very informal surveys and questionnaires. So here are some examples of statistics. According to the U.S. Department of Education, 33% of higher ed students today are the first in their family to attend college. Another example, the Higher Education Research Institute found that only 27% of first-generation college students are complete a bachelor's degree in 4 years. These evidence are statistics because we have percentages as percentages. Some things to think about when we're looking at statistics is, would the same statistics be found if the study were carried out elsewhere or under different circumstances? And to what extent is evidence from elsewhere, including from other countries, useful when considering an issue closer to home? So while statistics are good, okay, and are strong types of evidence, you always want to find out like who gave the survey, who did they survey, and there's just so much more to it, okay? So remember that you will also find statistics in an empirical research. So you might see both of those come hand in hand sometimes. Finally, our last type of evidence are quotations. And quotations is a piece of text copied directly from another source, and the writer refers to someone else's writing or what they said in support of their argument. So an example here is from an article, and this article is a recent one that says Belgians urged to eat more fries to help potato farmers amid pandemic related glut, okay? And so in this article, they're basically trying to tell Belgians to eat more fries because if you eat more fries, there's more need for potatoes, and therefore farmers will have a job, specifically potato farmers. And so in the article, there was a quote, okay? I'm going to read to you the passage, and then I underline the article. And in the passage, it says, the head of Belgium's Potato Processing Association, which is Belgapom, says the solution is beautifully simple. Eat more fries. Romain Cools, which is the name of someone from the association, points to statistics showing Belgian households typically eat 1 serving of fries per week and suggests one more won't hurt consumers and will really help producers. And then, quote unquote, it will not damage your health if you leave something else a little bit greasy out of your meal, Cools counsels. That will free up space in freezers, he said, all the way from large factories to supermarkets to home kitchens and allow more of the potatoes now harvested and at risk of rot to go into processing. And so here you have to ask yourself, okay, this guy, Romain Cools, like who is he? Is he really, is he someone that's reliable? If this person who wrote this article used Romain Cools' quote, okay, what he said to support their point, okay, is this person credible? Okay, so there are some things to think about when authors use quotations or quotes from other people. And part of the reason they do this is because, when they use quotations, it lends credibility to the author's argument. And this is especially true if, here's a big if, the person quoted is well known as an expert on the topic. So ask yourself these questions when these quotes are being used, when authors use quotes from other people. Like, who is being quoted? What do you know about the person being quoted? Is this person reliable, credible? Are you sure this person said the quote? And was the context, this is important, in which the quotation, what was the context in which the quotation was said? Because sometimes people will only cut and paste and use what they want to support the argument, and they don't provide the context of what was said before and afterwards, okay? So when you look at these 6 types of evidence, these are some final thoughts and some things that I want you to think about, okay? The goal of this presentation when you look at these evidence is to know, first of all, that not all evidence are created equally, meaning some are weak and some are strong. Some evidence are more reliable than other types of evidence. And another thing to think about is that just because an author provides evidence doesn't make it a strong argument. Based on the type of evidence and the reliability of the evidence will determine if an argument is strong or weak. So, which evidence are considered the strongest types of evidence? I would say of the 6, empirical research and statistics are the most strong types of evidence. So keep in mind that sometimes even with empirical research and statistics, there can still be flaws.